If you're like me and you like pigments, well, I've got news for you. I just collaborated with one of my favorite game composers to create a new bank called Blacklight. It has 120 different presets and 81 custom sound sources that we recorded, and it's all big, cool, cinematic-y stuff. And there's even a free version if you just want to check it out. For more information, you can check out the links down in the description. Well, hey there, beautiful. You're watching Putting the Stank on That Thing. I have a question for you. How would you take a simple idea like this and turn that into this using only like 3 techniques? Well, if you can answer that, then you probably don't need to watch the rest of this video. But for the rest of you chumps, let's talk about it. Welcome back to another episode of I don't know what to make a video about, so I'm going to stand in the woods and talk about music theory instead, I guess. In my last theory video, we talked about reharmonization, and before that, we talked about the magic of parallel modes and modal mixture, and before that, something else. And in keeping with the spirit of taking shit that sounds really complicated and horrifying and making it actually useful for the rest of us normies who never got learned to read too good, I want to talk in this video about secondary dominants and their very spicy kissin' cousin, tritone substitutions. In every scale, each note is assigned a name that describes its position and its harmonic function. As with all these videos, we're going to do everything out of the key of C major just for the sake of time, and that is C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C, and then the cycle repeats. So, in order, those notes are the tonic, the supertonic, the mediant, the subdominant, the dominant, the submediant, the leading tone, and then the cycle repeats over and over. So our dominant is going to be the 5, or G in this case, and our dominant chord would be the chord built off of that, or in this case, G major. Traditionally, in the context we're going to apply it in, there's also usually a added minor 7 on that chord, which gives us a dominant 7th chord, which is probably a term you've at least heard before. Tritones, on the other hand, same thing, just a little bit different. A tritone is just a flat 5. So we already know our 5, which is G, and if we flat that, we get an F sharp. So an F sharp is a tritone away from C, and it's called a tritone because it's 3 whole tones away from C. All that's not so scary, right? I swear that you can do this stuff, and by the end of this video, you're gonna be flying far and away with it. But in order to do all that, we do need to figure out how to find our dominant chords, don't we? Music, much like all things in life, is of course not fair either. Not all of us are created equal, and not all of us can afford more pro-level chords, so we have to find our own damn dominant chords. Lucky for you, though, you have just the tool to make that happen. However, I guess considering that the actual average number of fingers per hand is technically less than 5, this may be a deeply flawed technique, but that's a thought we can examine in another video. With our handy counting tool now in hand, we can use that to find our dominant. So in the key of C, we have C, D, E, F, and G. So we've got G, and building that chord out in the key of C major, we have a G major, as we've already discussed. So if we think about what this chord is doing, in the harmonic function of music and stuff, this 5 or dominant chord really wants to go home. If we have a chord progression of 1, 4, 5, it wants to go back there every time, more or less. So if that's a dominant chord, what is a secondary dominant? A secondary dominant is just the 5 of 5. So with our handy counting tool in hand, we can start on our dominant, or G. So we have G, A, B, C, D. So we've got D, and building that out in C major, we get a D minor chord. This means I should be able to swap out that G in this progression and slip that D up on in there, and it should basically flow the same way. So if we have our 1, 4, 5 progression again, we should be able to sub that G out for this D, and it should sound pretty good. Let's try it out. Not too shabby, right? It's almost like it's kind of doing the same thing. And in functional harmony, it very much is. This 2-to-1 movement is very, very common. And using our previous chat about reharmonization and stuff, we could switch this out to be a D major. Or we could do a D major with a minor 7. And that would be a secondary dominant chord because we're doing that dominant 7th thing. Or we could even get spicier and do a major 7. Let's try that out. So in our 1-4-5, but swapping out the G, feels pretty good, doesn't it? And that's really the foundation of everything we're going to use going forward here. That leads us nicely, I guess, into the penultimate question for this video. The fuck is a tritone substitution? Well, it's basically a secondary dominant, but a little bit different. Instead of finding the 5 of 5, we're going to use the flat 5 of 5. So we take our 5 chord, we find a chord a tritone away, and we substitute that in place of our dominant chord. I told you this stuff wouldn't be that bad. It's pretty straightforward, right? In our key of C major, that actually gives us a D flat, which is an incredibly crunchy chord in that key, but it's that crunch that's gonna make the resolution that much more satisfying. So if we think of our 1-4-5 progression again, we should be able to swap out the G for this D flat and sneak that D up on in there, and it should sound pretty good. Let's try it out. And that's just beautiful, isn't it? I think it's truly things like that that prove there is no real wrong answer in music. It's only ever a mistake if you admit that it is one. All that brings us to, I guess, the final boss question of this video. Why the fuck should I care, and how am I actually supposed to use this in my own music? Well, the really killer part of this whole thing is when you start to understand the idea that it can technically be used anywhere, all the time. So, thinking back to the example I played at the beginning of this video, where exactly does that A flat major 7 come in? Well, it's a tritone substitution for G. So switching gears in your brain here, let's think of this in the key of G major instead. Right? In G, we have our dominant of D, because it's the 5 of G, and a tritone away from that is an A flat. So that's what I'm using to pivot down to that G. And I'm doing the exact same trick for the F in that chord progression. I have this F sharp major 7, and I'm using that major 7 to pivot down to the F, and it's a really cool trick. I'm just tritone subbing some chords to get a little extra movement in the harmony in that progression to make it just a little bit more interesting. And taking that further, by the time I get down to the G in that progression, resolving from this D flat major 7, I'm actually going to a G diminished, just getting rid of the 7, G minor, G, and then C. And that's the magic of it, isn't it? That's the power of secondary dominants, tritone substitutions, and just a little tiny pinch of reharmonization thrown in for good measure. I know that up to this point, all of this has maybe sounded a little inevitably jazzy, but I promise this is an incredibly common trick and a very powerful technique for cinematic composition and cinematic music. I use it myself all the time just to find new colors and options and chords, and even as a way just to open up more interesting melody lines, because you can almost think of these as ways to swap between different keys or modes just kind of on the fly. Using a string library instead as our sound source, I think you should be able to hear how all these techniques connect and make for some really cool cinematic sounding chord progressions with not really a whole lot of effort involved. Pretty cool stuff, right?
Secondary dominants, tritone substitutions, all this stuff, it's really, really fun. You really should give it a shot. It's not that hard. It's a cool way to find new chords and progressions and ideas. It's a cool way to unstick yourself from a chord progression you've been locked in. And it's a really easy way to transition to new keys, other than the good old major second up or minor third down, because I think we've all heard that sound more than enough times by now. And, you know, go forth, my children, and make some music with this. It'll be super fun. You'll have a great time. Or, you know, maybe just go to your local guitar center and show up that dickhead that's over there jerking off over sweet Pantera riffs or whatever. Or better yet, make some more music for yourself today instead of watching another YouTube video and buying more plugins like you said you were going to do before you landed on this here video. But whatever. It's up to you. Thanks for watching. That's it. Bye.